Hey everybody, welcome back to the Retro Hack Shack. I'm Aaron Newcomb. You'll forgive the strange background here. I'm actually using Zoom to record this today. Something interesting happened to me which affected the recording of the video that I was working on, and that was I got appendicitis and had to go into the emergency room, and they decided to take my appendix out. So here's a couple pictures of me in the emergency room and then getting ready to go into surgery. It was kind of fun to see all the different technologies they use and ask them all these questions. They probably got sick of me, but that means that I had to stop the episode I was working on while it was in progress. So this will be part one, and then there'll be a part two to follow this up. By the way, I am doing fine. Just so you know, I'm recovering now at home and feeling pretty good. It's been a few days since I had my surgery done, and things are going well. And in case you're wondering, Penny is not happy that we can't play and she can't jump up like she has been. But the good news is she has lost those sharp baby teeth, so you won't be seeing those marks on my hands and arms as I'm working on stuff for my videos.
Don't let this big blowhard scare you anymore. Just walk right past them.
So I decided to use Zoom to record this intro since I couldn't lift cameras and lights and things like that and get everything set up for my normal setup. And it also allows me to show you this picture behind me, which is actually what I see every day facing forward. This is my setup that I see in front of me every day with my bench over there on the left, et cetera, et cetera. So anyway, on today's episode, I'm going to be taking a look at this early PC clone that I found at eWaste, and it was pretty interesting to me. So I picked it up for a reasonable price, brought it home, and I'm going to see if I can get this thing working and see what needs to be fixed on it. It's coming up right now on the Retro Hack Shack. So I found this clone PC the other day at an e-waste recycler, and it's in pretty bad shape, but hopefully the insides are okay. And just looking at the outside of the case here, you can see this thing has been shuffled around a lot during its lifetime. The case is in pretty bad shape on all four sides. The front of the case looks okay. Nothing is actually broken or damaged, just lots and lots of scuff marks. There's some tape on the side here. And I'm not sure whether this is an AT or XT clone, but I think it's somewhere in that time frame. We'll find out when we open it up. Moving around to the back here, you can see there's an exhaust for a fan inside the power supply. Classic power supply with the extra adapter for the monitor to plug in. And also on the back here, we have a number of things already installed. So here's a close-up of the back of the PC, and you can see right at the top there it says made in Taiwan, so that's a dead giveaway that this is a clone. And then we have the keyboard port below that, and continuing right, it looks like the first thing I see is maybe an external floppy port of some sort. I also see a game port for a joystick hookup, and then right next to that, it looks like there's a COM port or a serial port, parallel port, and then next to that it looks like an EGA card is plugged in. Those are a dead giveaway. If you see the two RCA jacks and the little dip switches there, that is almost always gonna be an EGA card. It seems like they all had that set up during a certain time span when those things were produced. So the first thing I want to do is just take the cover off and see what's inside. I've already taken the screws off, and this cover, they always get hung up a little bit right there on the lip, it seems like, but this is a very classic IBM style case. It's got the little ridges on the bottom, so the case cover just slides out straight towards the front. And now we can get our first look at the inside of this clone PC. So right away we can see a floppy drive and hard drive that are stacked in the right compartment there. And this particular hard drive came from the factory, it looks like, with some bad blocks already identified. Come on, zoom in there, camera. Whoop, there we go. So you can see there's already some bad blocks that are marked on the hard drive itself from the factory. Standard PC XT power supply there. And there's the cards that we saw earlier. So definitely one of them is a combo card, a floppy controller plus serial ports, it looks like. There's the MFM controller and then the EGA controller that we saw before. And taking a peek down here, we can see there's 4 banks of memory available as well. And the lovely turbo button and reset button on the front here, as well as a lock button to lock. I guess that locks access to the hard drive. At least those are, looks like they're floppy symbols there on the keyboard lock. Now I'm going to take these cards out, but just looking at this motherboard, you can tell right away that this is an XT clone and not an AT clone. AT computers typically had the 16-bit ISA slots on them, and they had a 286 processor, which we'll look at in a minute. And they also had a battery backup usually included, and this has none of that. So this is definitely an XT clone, or it would be very similar to an IBM 5160 that came out in March of 1983. So here we can get a closer look at the EGA card, and you can see that this one is actually branded Paradise Basic EGA card down there in the lower right hand corner, and even the main chip on this says PAR EGA card. So obviously an EGA card made by Paradise. Nice. Now here's this combo card. It's the floppy controller, but it also has the serial parallel game port and that other port, which I'm not exactly sure what it is. It also might have a real-time clock, which is why it has this NEMA battery, and that battery has started leaking. So that's one of the fixes we'll have to do at some point, is taking that battery out and replacing it. And here's a close-up of the MFM card. Now, these cards back in the early days were not branded very well, but if you look closely, you'll see the Seagate symbol in a few places on this card. So that's a dead giveaway that this is a Seagate ST10 card, which supports the ST225 hard drive that we have in this PC. Now I want to remove the motherboard, but before I do, I'm going to need to take a picture of where all these connectors go. That's always a good idea. And the motherboard will just slide out with a little encouragement here. And now I can just dust everything off with a little compressed air. Alright, so now that the motherboard is out of the case, we can take a closer look at it. And this is always interesting because these old boards, like I said, the branding wasn't good. You don't know what it is. You really have to search to find out what's going on these boards and what kind of board it is. So first of all, we have the Siemens CPU. It's a Siemens 8088, and there is place for a math coprocessor. And in the middle of the board is the BIOS, and it's labeled Urso DTK, which may help identify the manufacturer of this board. And down in the far corner, we have the memory, 4 banks, as I said before, and this layout was quite popular as it brought the total memory capacity up to 640K. One of the other things I noticed was this PROM down in the bottom of the board. I had to look this one up, but if this thing were to go bad, it would be very difficult to replace. And finally, up in the corner, there's this Willis chip, which I'm not sure what it is. I tried to look it up and couldn't find any information about it. So if you know what this Willis chip is, let me know in the comments below. And one final thing I liked about this board was these empty headers, or maybe they're there for test pins, I don't know, but the power is all broken out, and of course you could test each of these ISA board pins if you wanted to right there. So those might come in handy if I need to do some troubleshooting. Now, the first thing I want to test before I do anything else is test this power supply. If the power supply is bad, then I can't really go any further until I can source a new power supply for this thing. So the first thing I want to do is I want to test the AC side and make sure there are no dead shorts there. So with the power turned on, even though it's not plugged in, I'm just going to test and make sure I'm getting at least some level of resistance between those two pins. If I do get at least something there, then that's good. A lot of times refa capacitors can blow, for example, and you'll get a dead short. So you're going to want to know that before plugging it in. It's super easy to test. And I did the same tests on both the 5-volt line and the 12-volt line on the output of the power supply, again, just to make sure there was no dead shorts there either, and it all looks good. You should also test the negative lines as well. There should be some negative rails here. And just for completeness, I went ahead and took a look at the motherboard as well, just to make sure that there was no shorts anywhere on the motherboard either, and that all tested okay as well. So it was time to turn on the power supply and check out the voltages. Now, a lot of times these power supplies require a load before they will start up and run. So I connected a spare hard drive. I didn't want to tax the MFM hard drive at this point, so I just used a spare and I used that as a load and didn't connect anything else to it and turned on the power supply. And this way I could test the rails and see what they were doing. And it looks like the 5-volt line was good. And the 12-volt line was low, but that's to be expected. I did test the 12-volt line again once I got everything hooked up, and it measured exactly 12 volts, so that's good as well. Next, I turned my attention to the floppy drive and the hard drive. Now, I noticed on the floppy drive that the handle wouldn't turn, but I had forgotten that this was on purpose and that on some of these models, you needed to have the disk inserted before the handle would actually turn and close the mechanism. And so you can kind of see how that works here. When you put a disk in, it releases this little latch here, and that allows you to turn the handle and close the mechanism. So since this label was coming off this disc, I thought I'd throw in a quick tip here. If you want to reuse these old labels that where the adhesive's not quite sticking yet, what you can do is just get yourself a piece of paper, smack that label down, and then use some of this crafter's tape. I'll show the kind that I use here. And I just overlap the, put as much of it on it, kind of as a sticky, gooey thing, but it does hold really well. And you can just put the label right back on the disc. And when you're done, this thing holds really, really strongly and doesn't come up. I've done this with dozens of discs with different types of labels, and it seems to hold. I can't even pry it up with my fingernail after I've got it down. It is permanent. So anyway, it's a great solution for fixing old labels. Everything at this point was looking really good, so I went ahead and installed the motherboard and got all the cards installed and all the cables connected, and I was ready to power it on for its first test. And look at that, it's actually working. A few errors, of course, because the keyboard's not connected, but it actually got through a post, and it actually works and looks great on my EGA monitor. So it's the next day now, and I wanted to test the hard drive. So I got the hard drive hooked up, and once again, the computer boots up quite a bit louder now with that MFM hard drive whirring away, but it does recognize the MFM hard drive, the correct type, so that's good. And after quite a long wait, this thing actually booted into DOS. Believe it or not, it booted in off the MFM hard drive into DOS. I could not believe it. So before I go any further, I'm going to want to back up this hard drive for a number of reasons. One is these hard drives are notoriously unstable at this point. It is almost 40 years old. So I want to get the data off there before I do any stress testing or loading of programs and things like that. I want to see if I can get the data off intact. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to use this card, which is a XT-CF Lite version 4.1. It's a version of the XT2 IDE, and the this CF card just plugs in there. It goes in the side and plugs in like that. So I'm going to put this in and see if I can get this card recognized as the C drive, and then back it up to an image on this card. And if I can do that, then I can go on and fix the other things. Ah, that looks good. Okay, so it looks like it's booted off the XT to IDE card now. So let's see if I do DIR. Yeah, so this is the it's now seeing the C drive as this card over here. Let's see if it recognizes the MFM drive as a D drive or something. So let's go to D and see what's on here. Ah, perfect. So now we have D. The D drive is now the MFM drive. So now I can do, you can use Xcopy or something like that to copy all the files over to the CF card. There's not a lot of hidden files, and there's a couple of MS-DOS hidden files on the partition, but I can use Xcopy pretty much to back up this entire directory, get all the data off, and then we can explore what's on this disk. Okay, so this is what I was afraid of. Started copying the files over, and we got a sector not found, reading drive D. So I can hit retry, but there's probably damage on this disk, unfortunately. It probably won't read it. Yeah, we're just going to have to ignore and keep trying. Hopefully there's not too many of these files that have bad sectors. Okay, so there was a lot of corruption on this MFM hard disk, so much that I'm probably not going to be able to use it, but I may go back through and see if I can mark all those blocks as bad. In this case, I think that I would have to go in and manually tell it which blocks are bad. I'm not sure I want to go to that trouble because this drive is most likely going to continue to degrade over time. So I may just take that out. You can also see that I've switched to the digital screen with the HDMI to RGB to HDMI adapter that I've done several videos on. You can check those out in the link above. One of the things that I didn't realize at first when I was going through this is it kept coming up with the RAM test that says 128K of RAM. And I know that's not true because it's got 4 full banks of RAM on the main board. So at least it has 256K, right? That's what I would assume. And then also I started looking at the chips. Now the chips are a mix, which was common back in I believe the IBM 5160 did it this way as well, or at least some versions of it, where the first 2 banks were populated with 41 256 RAM. So that's 256 per every 8 chips plus 1 parity. So 256, that's 512 at least. And then the other 2 banks are 64K each. Those are 4164s. And so that would be an additional 64 in each of those banks. So that's an additional 128. And that's how you get up to 640K of RAM. So this should have 640K of RAM. But when I test it, it tests 120K only. So I started playing around with these jumpers, and I can actually get it to register 640, but I can't get it to test all the way through. So I'm guessing I may have a bad RAM chip here. I'm not sure, but let me show you. I can change these jumpers out. Okay, so here's an option that gives me 512K. I don't know if it's just stopping at 512K or if it seems like it should be going to 640. I need to get it to see that extra 128K that's in bank 2 and 3. Of course, the problem with this is there's no documentation for this particular DTK board. There's other DTK boards that I can find, but I can't find this particular model, so I don't know what the jumper settings are supposed to be. Okay, so I've been having quite a time with this memory, working on it for about a day here off and on in between work, trying to figure out what the settings are. So one thing I've been working on are these jumpers over here, those 2 jumpers right there in the middle of the screen. Been setting those back and forth in all the various different settings, on, off, up, down, different ways, and I could never get it to work. And then I was doing some research online and came across this web page that listed the jumper settings for 640K, and they also indicated that there was another set of jumper, or one more jumper in addition to this that you need to set. It took me a while to find it, but it's right down here. As you can see, there's the metal that comes down from the floppy or the hard drive / floppy bays. And right underneath there, let's see if we can zoom in on it, there is a jumper. So this is kind of buried in there. And according to him, I have this set correctly for 640K. Well, I've been doing a bit more digging on this board, and I ended up finding some good resources. So on Vogons, I'm not sure how you pronounce that site, I was able to find another thread where someone was dealing with similar issues. I also found the board on TH99, which is a website that I'd highly recommend, and it's filled with old boards for XT, AT, 286 style boards and all the jumper configs. So I'd highly recommend those two sites if you're dealing with problems like this. And thanks to those two sites, I was even able to find the original manual for this board. So that had all the settings documented in it, and it's of the age where it even had all the schematics in the back. So that was a really great find. And what I've come down to is a couple of guesses as to what's going on. The first one is that some of these logic chips in here that actually probably control some of the flip-flopping and stuff that's going on to deal with the RAM could be bad. One of them could be not flipping or not flopping or what have you. The other thing is, pretty much any of these resistors could be bad, so those should probably be tested, as well as the voltage all the way through the banks to make sure it's consistent. The last thing I want to test is actually the BIOS. So you can see here, this is the BIOS chip here. This is mentioned a couple of times as, potential issues, and one person even fixed their RAM problem by trying a new BIOS. So I found an updated BIOS that someone's made as recently as the mid-2000s. I think it's 2017. And it has a bunch of extra features. And I've never burned an EEPROM before, but I do have an EEPROM burner and several EEPROMs. If I have the right EEPROM, I may as well try to burn it and see if I can get some more information from the advanced features, because it does like card detection and a bunch of automatic things like that. So I think I'm going to try that BIOS first, just because I've never done it and I'm curious about the process, and we'll see how that goes. All right, so here we are at the bench, and I've got my programmer and my EEPROMs here. Now, these EEPROMs are 3 different sizes I found. They're all 27 pin, but they're different sizes. So 27 128, 27 256, and 27 512. Now, I got these at XS Solutions, which is a electronics XS supply shop here in San Jose. If you want to take a look at that, I'll put a link in the description above, and where I did a video where I actually visited XS Solutions and talked a little bit more about what's there. Now, this programmer I'm using, I got from AliExpress, and if we flip this over, this is the TL8662 Plus. I don't know if you can see it there, but yeah, it was a pretty cheap programmer, but a very reliable one. This series is used by lots of folks, so there's a website there. I don't know if you can see it. Anyway, I'm going to use this programmer, and we'll see how we do. Okay, so this is the BIOS I want to try. It's the Super PC/Turbo XT BIOS, specifically built for 5150s, 5160s, and XT clones, which is what I have. And it comes with a bunch of utilities and support for enhanced keyboards, etc. So I downloaded this. Let's take a look at the README file. So here's the README file. It has instructions for building and installing the BIOS. Looks like there's a lot of options here that you can set, which is pretty cool. So for example, if you had an enhanced keyboard that had the 101 keys, F11 and F12 on it, etc., you could use this, and this doesn't mean that you can't use XT keyboards. So there's also a bunch of other settings in here for things like turbo. So obviously this is a turbo PC that I have, but maybe not everybody has that. So you can disable turbo. You can also disable the hotkey or enable the hotkey. So pretty cool, different features. And there looks like there's a bunch of test features here as well. So there's something that will test the CPU. There's something that will test the video. You can define the maximum memory, but it looks like the default is 460. So let's just make sure. I'm going to go ahead and open up the source code that we're going to have to compile. Let's just make sure that that is correct. So here's the source code, and apparently I have Atmel Studio installed because that's what it opened up in, but I think you could just open this up in a text editor as well. And down here we can see all of those configuration options. So if you wanted this to work on an official IBM PC, you could turn that on, for example. I'm going to leave all these defaults in here, but I do think it's interesting that they've enabled all of these things. The one that I like down here is the title bar fade, which is enabled by default. And I love this define for fancy pants. So I'm guessing this does some sort of fancy title bar fade thing. We'll find out if this works. So the other thing I wanted to point out, which is nice about this particular EEPROM or ROM set, is that it actually supports multiple size EEPROMs. So you can see here there's a 64K, has support for a 2764, which is a 64K EEPROM, all the way up to the 512K EEPROM. And I'm not sure if I captured it on my when I was looking at the motherboard before, but there are actually 5 ROM sockets, and you can put in it also compiles these basic ROMs. So if you wanted basic running from your ROMs, it will supply those 4 ROM images. You could burn 4 more EEPROMs and have basic installed on board, as well as the main BIOS. I'm just going to be building the main BIOS and see how that goes. So let's go ahead and open up a terminal window. I believe this is what we need. And I'm going to navigate to the place where I have these files on my hard drive. And now I should just be able to run make-win.bat. Okay, it says success. I didn't see any errors, but I'm going to scroll up and check just in case. Otherwise, it's time to burn the EEPROM. And looking at the directory where I've got the files that I downloaded here, there's a new directory called EEPROMs. And if I look in here, sure enough, here's all of the different types of EEPROMs broken out, and here's the basic ROMs and the PCXT BIOS, and that's the one that we need. Okay, well, I stopped recording at some point because I was having a lot of trouble with the programmer. It kept asking me to upgrade. I tried maybe 10 times or so. It finally looks like it did it. So you can see, well, maybe you can't see. I can't make this text any bigger, but the firmware version was 4.01.00, and now it's 04.02.125. So I'm hoping this will work. I've got the ROM image loaded here, and I'm going to hit program again and keep my fingers crossed. Everything's installed, ready to go. Let's hit program and see what happens. Programming failed. So I decided to try to erase the EEPROM by using this little UV flashlight that I have that goes with some glue that I use quite frequently. So I just turned it on and set it over the little window on the EEPROM and let it sit there for about 10 minutes. But unfortunately, it wasn't strong enough, or maybe it wasn't quite the right light to be able to erase the EEPROM. So I ended up buying the cheapest EEPROM eraser I could find on Amazon and had it delivered the next day. It has this little drawer that pulls out, and you can put one or multiple EEPROMs in and set the timer for the length of time. I think I did mine for 20 minutes, but maybe I didn't have to do it that long. I don't know, maybe 10 minutes or 5 minutes would have been sufficient. I'll test it out and see. But anyway, these erase the EEPROMs quite effectively. I had no issues after that. So now I've taken out the old ROM, I've put in this new one, and I cleaned the sockets with a little bit of deoxit just in case that was an issue as well. So let's turn this on and see if we get anything different on the memory. Or anything at all on the screen. Oh, we did get something on the screen. Okay. Parity error. Okay, now this is great because we're getting, I know that might be hard to see, but it says parity error at 26E82. So that's telling us a lot more. So now I just have to go look up and see where that is, and perhaps that'll tell me what's going on. But it did say, it did look like it counted to 128K. I'm just going to reboot this one more time and see if I can capture that output. Okay, it is getting past 128K. It gets up to around 156. And then it says parity error at 26E82. So this is really good. This BIOS is actually helping figure out what that is. Okay, so I looked up that code in hex, and that corresponded with around 159,000 or something like that in decimal. So that means if this is that first bank, if that's 256K, that means that one of those chips is the problem in that first bank. So just to test that theory, I went ahead and swapped all the chips, not just back and forth, but also up and down. In other words, the chip that was down in the lower right-hand corner is now in the upper left-hand corner. So I swapped all the chips around, and now I want to see if that parity error moves. That'll tell me, hopefully, that the error is in one of the RAM chips and not in one of the logic circuitry, because if it was in the logic, then the error would show up in the same place every time. At least that's my theory. So let's go ahead and turn it on and see if the parity error moves. Okay, testing. Okay, we got past 256. It's up into the 400K range now. Parity error at, come on, baby. Yep, it did move, 66E82. So let me see where that is in these chips, and maybe I can just swap out. It'll tell me which chip it is, and I can just swap that out. 66E82. And I did validate that that address actually is in the same row that I moved over, that I switched over. So now it was started in the first bank, and now it's in the second bank of memory. So now I know where that culprit is. So I ordered some more memory. That should be coming in any day, and I will do a part 2 to this one where I see if I can, number 1, fix the RAM, number 2, fix that battery, that leaking battery that's on the combo floppy controller, and then we'll take a look at the software that ran on this and test everything out and make sure it's working. So that'll be coming up on part 2. But that's going to be it for this episode. For those of you who saw my posts on Instagram or Twitter and wish me well, I really appreciate it. Things are going well. Recovery is going well. Thank you so much. If you want to follow the channel, you can follow their Instagram or Twitter. It's just Retro Hack Shack. Of course, like and subscribe these videos that I'm doing if you want to see more, and become a patron. I'm getting a few more patrons, not a lot, but a few more, and I'm going to start doing some question and answer soon. So if you would like to ask a question, something that's happened on the show or the way I make my videos or anything like that, become a patron, leave your question there, and I will get to it soon. So with that, thanks for watching. We'll see you next time. If you want to support me on Patreon, you can go to patreon.com/retrohackshack and sign up.
End of line.